Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is the Ukraine War Frontline update for the 12th of June 2023. There's so much going on. I keep saying this the last few days. It's really difficult to keep an eye on what's happening. And in fact, some news has just come out in the last sort of 20 minutes or so that something there's counterattacks for the Russians in one particular place. So it's all kind of happening. Anyway, hopefully I do justice to what is going on the front line. We're going to start in the north here and just to let you know that the Ukrainians are still shelling actually in Grivoron and Shebekino areas, the two places where they've done these incursions into Belgorod. They are still giving hassle to the Russians there. They've blown up a mobile phone mast just I think today or in the last 24 hours. So there's still activity taking place across the border, giving the Russians something to think about. Here, I've noticed that on Warmapper's map, they have added in Brady Afric's open source intelligence work in terms of where the Russians have built their fortifications, defensive fortifications. That includes Dragon's Teeth, trenches, minefields, so on and so forth. And that's really useful to see that, and you get an idea of where these exist on a front line. So when we talk about places using this map, you can get a sense of where the deepest or most troublesome defenses have been built. Okay, so we're going to start in the northeast. We're going to go clockwise around the map. I'm going to start with Andrew Perpetua. He gives basically a nice quick summation as of last night. So this is 10 hours old, and like I said in my news piece this morning, most of the activity apparently is taking place at night, or a lot of the Ukrainian attacking activities, because they have the advantage with nocturnal imaging, thermal optics, and so on and so forth. So this summary will be somewhat out of date. However, it does give us a little bit of an idea. Okay, so let's have him starting off in Kupiansk. So hopefully you get an idea of his maps and how they look. So this is Kupiansk here. This is Maziutivka and area. That is, if we look at my map, if I can get it correct, we're going to go up to the north. Sorry, I was in the middle of working on it. So this is up here in Liman Pershi, Maziutivka, Kupiansk, coming down to Svatova down here. That is where this map starts. So Andrew Perpetua says, Kupiansk area, things are happening. Artillery duels taking place. Russia has lost some equipment lately, verified by video evidence. Not much known details beyond that. In the Svatova area, as we come further down, things are happening. Details are scarce. Russians claiming to repel attacks on a regular basis. Also rumors that Ukraine broke through to Krivoshivka. Altogether, a few details are known of this area. So let's go and have a look at that on my map. So as we come down to Svatova, it could be that in this area the Russians have lost some ground. The Ukrainians could have broken through. We have seen this area has been quite hot on activity. Ukrainians were pushing in Kuzyemivka. Russians are pushing back. There was a Russian attack probably 2 weeks ago now, that Ukrainians then repelled and took back the ground that the Russians took straight away, and you had some Russians running away from here. So in that area, that is where Andrew Perpetua is saying there could be a breakthrough in this place, Krivoshivka. That is just to the north west of Svatova there. So we go back to Andrew Perpetua. As we come down this front line towards Kreminna, we have activity taking place in the forest around Dubrova. The claim here is Kreminna area. Judging by satellite evidence, there is some slight evidence that fighting has moved north toward Dubrova. Russia claims to have repelled attacks near Chervonopipivka. Very little information in this area, so Chervonopipivka is up there. And then the ISW, Institute for the Study of War, claims that there's activity around Torska as well. So that's Chervonopipivka, Torska, and Dubrova is in there in the forest. I've got that purple line. It's just there was another actually geolocated evidence. Some geolocated evidence suggests the Russians have pushed forward in that area. I need to change my mapping in this area to see what's going on. I'm trying to get my map to represent at the moment two different mappers. So as we come down from Bilahorivka, there's quite a lot of activity in Bilahorivka, but from here on in, the blue line represents Andrew Perpetua's mapping, and the red line represents Suryak mapping. So that's blue as a pro-Ukrainian, red as a pro-Russian, and both of these lines represent from now on in Russian defensive lines. It's not where the Ukrainians are. These are Russian defensive lines. And in front of that, you've got to imagine there will be some large amount of grey zone, contested area. So this is where the Russians definitely are, as according to these two mappers, with activity taking place in front of that. It doesn't mean that the Ukrainians are just in front of these guys. People don't like control ground right up to the enemy. Okay, so there's going to be grey zone between the two forces, but this is where the Russian defensive forces are. Andrew Perpetua says of this area, this is a Seversk area. A Russian attacks Bilahorivka daily, no successes. Video evidence of several destroyed Ukrainian vehicles in this town. Unsure whether they were destroyed or other than this, when they were destroyed. Sorry, other than this, little information is available. So the Russians are pushing around in Bilahorivka. I've adapted my map around that area. It's interesting that ISW does note that there's heavy fighting. That's according to Russians, claiming there's heavy fighting in that area. And then we move down to really to Bakhmut. We go back to Andrew Perpetua to see what he has to say. Okay, in the Vuhledar area, which is this northern area of Bakhmut, let's go and place that on my map to give you some kind of understanding. I know I'm flipping around maps quite quickly. So we have the coming down this Seversk front line here, where there's quite a big difference between what those two mappers say in the Bilahorivka area. It's generally in agreement, but I do need to update the mapping in that area just to make sure it's all where they claim it is. And we come down to the Bakhmut area. This is where I start having three colors now. I'm throwing the yellow of Deep State map around the Bakhmut area. Deep State map is not really updating very currently. There's some movement. There's been some movement over the last 24 hours down in the Zaporizhia front, but showing no movement here for some time. In fact, none of the mappers are showing any territorial exchanges in the Bakhmut area. Andrew Perpetua says in that northern part, just to remind you, that is here. Oh, no, it's not. It's here, sorry. Vesely to Rozdolivka. There's a small village called Sakio Vanseti there. Mykolaiivka, Krasnopolivka further down. So this area, Andrew Perpetua says. Vuhledar area, Ukraine seems to have moved closer to Yakovlivka from Rozdolivka based on satellite imagery and rumor. Known if this resulted in success. Russia, probably unknown. Russia trying to attack Vesely with no success. Ukraine attacked Saki Vanseti without success. Little overall information. So there is activity going on along here. That I need to update Perpetua's map just up here because that blue line is no longer Perpetua's line just for that. I just need to update my map. Here it's more accurate. So there is activity taking place in that northern area, but no kind of mapping changes. Then there was lots of talk yesterday about the Russians pushing the Ukrainians out of Bakhmut and saying we've recaptured Bakhmut, which is interesting because A, the Ukrainians never claimed to have captured it, and B, the Russians were denying that Ukrainians had it. And then after denying they had it, they say they've retaken it. So it's all a little bit odd. It's just the Russians, I think, spinning a little bit there. There is activity there. There was certainly a counter attacks or pushing back from the Russians in that area. Andrew Perpetua says of that Bakhmut area, Russians' multi-day counterattack in Bakhmut ended in failure. They could not push Ukraine back. Ukraine is beginning to move forward again. They moved 50 to 100 meters today. Some say 250, but that's likely overly optimistic. He actually shows no change in the overall mapping. That kind of talk of back and forth will be happening in the grey zone. And then we're going to go on to have a little look. Actually, I want to talk about this, which is because it refers to Bakhmut. Ukraine has noticed Russia is transferring its most combat-capable units, Marines, airborne troops, paratroopers, etc., from the Kherson region to Zaporizhia and Bakhmut. So this is a result of the Kakhovka Dam exploding, and therefore them realizing and perhaps even planning that their troops will not be needed in the Kherson region so much around the Dnipro River, so they are moving them to where they're needed more, the Bakhmut region and Zaporizhia as well. What else do we have to say? Ukrainian defenders have advanced from 250 to 700 meters on the flanks of Bakhmut, pushing the Russian forces back. Positional combat is ongoing. Russia is trying to counterattack, but to no avail, says the spokesperson for the eastern grouping of forces, the Ukrainians there. So that is what their claim is, and this is kind of what we hear in the ISW. Nothing too much to report on top of what Andrew Perpetua is saying. He goes on to Klishchivka, which is further to the south, and says not much change that he knows of. Although, as you've just heard, the Ukrainian MOD, they're saying, a spokesperson saying that there is movement. There are Ukrainian gains on the flanks. That's north and south. So you'd imagine that there must be some kind of movement in Klishchivka, but it's not being reflected in any mapping changes by any of the mappers. So the mapping here seems to be at a stalemate, but there is ongoing fighting, and it does seem that the Ukrainians are regaining some initiative, some momentum in that area after a brief pushback, certainly in Bakhivka, by the Russians. And then we come on further to the south, past New York, where there's no activity, to Avdiivka. Andrew Perpetua says of that. Actually, he says of Kupiansk, which is slightly further to the south, says there might be more going on than advertised in the media. Ukraine is steadily moving forward, but with no press coverage. Sorry about that. That is just in the very southern parts of Klishchivka. Not a lot going on, but there could be some activity taking place there. We heard that the Ukrainians took back these trench lines or tree lines with trenches, I think, in here, and the Russians have pushed back there. We've got geolocated evidence of that, and it could be that around that area, maybe even further to the south, we know there's some activities south of Kupiansk and Ozarianivka in this area, just past the canal as it meets Mayorsk down here. This is a place called Mayorsk where the two railway lines meet in a sort of junction there. There has been activity around there, but other than that, quiet in New York. And finally, get on to Avdiivka as promised. Andrew Perpetua says New York area, zero information. Avdiivka area. Right, heavy casualties for both sides. Ukraine has gone on several successful counterattacks around Avdiivka. My map is very conservative. Ukraine likely controls more ground. Russia attacking Avdiivka and sometimes Severny. Heavy fighting near Kamyanka and Novokonyovo. So that's up this northern area, heavy fighting. Says that also fighting the Russians trying to push in Severny. And an arrow he's got there. Now, interestingly, the ISW reports quite a bit of Ukrainian attacking around Avdiivka, which is a kind of change of the narrative. So Ukraine forces made marginal gains near Avdiivka, and that's in line with what Perpetua says, as Russian forces continued limited ground attacks on the Avdiivka city and Donetsk city line. As of yesterday, geolocated footage shows that Ukrainian forces have made marginal advances south of Novelsky. We're going to check that out in a second. The Russian MOD claimed that Russian forces repelled 8 Ukrainian ground attacks near Novobakhmutivka. That's up north, Krasnohorivka up the north as well, and Pervomaisky, as well as in Marinka, which is much to the south. That is to say that the Ukrainians are attacking in places like Krasnohorivka, Novobakhmutivka, and Pervomaisky as well, and they have made gains, geolocated evidence to suggest gains in the Novelsky region, which is something that has been reported by people like Andrew Perpetua over the last few days anyway. Now, I showed you this footage yesterday. I think I might have implied it was in Zaporizhia, and I think Thierry pointed out that no, it was in the Avdiivka area, and it was a combined arms, using troops, obviously infantry, Humvees, coupled with heavy machine guns on top that are giving supporting fire and suppressive fire possibly, and drones being the eye in the sky. So this looked like a pretty successful attack on those positions. These positions have been geolocated to here. So let's plug that in and see where that attack took place. And just to let you know, interesting. So just to let you know that the blue line is just around here because I'm still doing my map in some places. Here's an example. This doesn't reflect Andrew Perpetua's map. I just need a bit more time. I'm almost there before the whole front line represents the different mappers, but it's still a bit messy in certain areas. And here's one of them. So I don't know where Perpetua's got the Russian. Actually, I do because he's just shown us a map. So his Russian lines, as in the red lines here, uh, have it sort of back there, which would be further back from where I have the lines. However, this does indicate that it is in a grey zone as far as what I had. So interesting that those are Russian positions here, rather back on the line. You'd imagine them to be back here if Syriac Maps is correct. So actually, Syriac Maps is a bit more conservative than the reality here. The Ukrainians are attacking Russians in that position. So interesting bit of geolocation going on there. And so that is Adiivka. There are losses, heavy losses on both sides, according to Andrew Perpetua. And then we come further down to the south. So let's go to the, oops, no, wrong way now. So he says of Marinka that Russia continuously tries to capture Marinka with no success. My map likely overestimates Russian control. There, he's got quite a lot of control up in the north of Marinka. Let's go and have a look at that on my map. So as we come down, oops, goodness me, my fingers are terrible, aren't they? We come down from Novelsky, just below Avdiivka, to Marinka. And in this area, we have some extensive Russian control to the north. And Syriac map still has this to the south in a place called Pobieda. They still have Russians having some kind of purchase in that settlement, which would be really significant because this would enable Russia to then, the Russians, to be able to try to encircle Marinka more successfully. But no other mapper seems to have that. They've had that for a good week, 2 weeks now. And that would be significant. I'm not sure that the Russians do have that ground there. Anyway, as we come down past Vuhledar, Andrew Perpetua says no news of Vuhledar. You can see the difference in the two mappers all around this area. So Andrew Perpetua had the Russian lines much further back than Syriac maps. This is where the mapping now is consistent. There are no oddities sticking out. So you can see around Vuhledar, much more generous to the Russians is Syriac maps. And then, you know, some differences all the way along this front line. Okay, let's get to, we're going to come towards Novodonetsk and what is taking place in Velika Novosilka. And as we come down here, recognize that we've got all these towns, these little towns, villages on the way down the river, down towards a place called Staromilnivka. And this is important because just past here we start getting the proper defenses. Now the Russians, the Ukrainians seem to have put the Russians under the cosh by taking the high ground either side of the river that comes down there. So you can imagine that's going to be the lowest ground. And the Ukrainians are trying to get by here. They've now taken control of Novodarivka. We've got evidence of that, and Levadne. As well as these towns here. So Storozheve, Makarivka, Staromayorska, and possibly down to Staromilnivka. Okay, let's try and make sense of that and see what some of the claims are, because there's significant new details coming out just now. So the various claims were last night that Neskuchna was taken, Storozheve, Makarivka, Staromayorska, and Urizhine. Okay, now we can see that developing throughout the different sources. So this is Syriac maps admitting that that's pretty much the case. Then we have Poulet Volant talking about that, how maybe there's a bit of grey zone around Staromayorska. But of course, this is all ongoing. And you've got this important place we'll talk about in a second, Staromilnivka, just below that. And you can see also that there's gains for the Ukrainians over there. Novodarivka now, I think there's geolocated evidence that that has been taken with the Ukrainians putting up flags in that area. No reports talking about these places as well. Earlier on yesterday was Staromayorsk and Uriozhine in the grey zone. Now, War Gonzo, this is all kind of admitted by the Russian sources as well, Rebar War Gonzo. And this is what OSINT Technical said last night of War Gonzo's claims. Uh, and we'll talk about this and see whether it's changed since then. So War Gonzo might be right. I hate saying this, he says. I think he confirms that Stara Mlynivka is a trigger point for the commitment of more strategic Russian reserves in line with Russian defensive doctrine. And we know that they are getting reserves from Kherson. He does say that Makarivka was a serious loss, so losing Makarivka was serious. So the claim is, Wargonzo says that if the Ukrainians reach Starominivka, then the situation for the Russians becomes critical. Okay, let's go and look at that on my map. So if they reach this place here, things become critical. Why that? Why is this not critical and that becomes critical? Well, if we look at where the Russian fortifications are, we go to Brady Afric's map where he's done some great bit of open source intelligence work to look at where the defensive lines are. You will see that where the Ukrainians have had trouble further to the west in the Orikhiv area, that's because they are fighting at, I think it's because they are fighting at those minefields and entrenchments and fortifications, right? So they've reached there and that's why they're taking the losses. When you come over here to Velika Novosilka, you can see from Velika Novosilka to Starominivka, there are none of these fortifications. So they've made quite quick going here and they've taken a lot of ground without too many losses in this area. The losses have come further to the west. But that is because they haven't reached these fortifications. They get to Starominivka, and that's critical. If they take that, then they're looking at breaking through the fortifications that actually sit behind that. So I'd say if they break this line of defense, it's pretty significant. The reason is because actually, when you look across the whole Zaporizhia and Donetsk line, once you've broken through here, there aren't too many fortifications and defenses between there and Mariupol. Whereas once you break through the first line of defense in the Orikhiv front, you've got another line of defense, and then around Tokmak you've got further defenses, and you've got further defenses towards Melitopol. So I think Wargonzo is correct in saying, yeah, it gets critical if they break through there, because actually, it's some have said it's kind of plain sailing all the way down to Mariupol from there. You've just got roads and the Ukrainians will be able to use the roads then. That I doubt they'll be heavily mined. I don't know whether they're chuck up mines as a kind of last ditch effort to slow the Ukrainians down. But as far as this kind of area is concerned, it's far more fortified. So yes, the Ukrainians have done really well in Velika Novosilka, but actually the difficulty starts now when they approach Starominivka. Okay, but not only that, it appears that the Russians have gone on a counterattack. Anyway, let's get back to my sources. So, so this is geolocation of Novodarivka being reclaimed by the Ukrainians, and that is to remind you. Do we go and look at the Poulet Volant map? Let's look at the Poulet Volant map because it's nice and clear and colourful. So that's in this area. So Novodarivka there. That was claimed to have been taken originally by the Ukrainians, then the Russians claimed to have taken it back. It was probably more accurately just always in a grey zone. But we're going to return to what's going on here because it looks like the Russians are putting in a bit of a counterattack from the gains that the Ukrainians have made all the way down to the Staromayorsk direction. Okay, so what are the claims? Russian sources are reporting that the 127th Motor Rifle Division, with the support of heavy artillery and aircraft from the Russian Air Force, and this is a challenge. So the Russian Air Force is still active on this front. There aren't the air defense systems. I mean, my claim was that the Ukrainians should have put something like a Patriot air defense system somewhere in the Zaporizhia area to protect Zaporizhia that gets hit by S-300s and ballistic missiles all the time, but that would have had a reach to protect a lot of the front line as well. So, going from that's what 120 kilometers there. So you put a Patriot anti-aircraft system there, you are going to have a good chance of taking out a lot of the aircraft that are providing close air support for the Russian defenders. Or you could have placed it somewhere more centrally. I don't know that enables that system to do all of the above. That I'm sure they have some systems around, but I think it's so important to knock out the Russian Air Force at this point. I mean, they are going to be a real thorn in the side for the Ukrainians. Anyway, to return to this source, so the Russian Air Force has launched a counteroffensive along with the ground forces along the Velika-Novosilka front in the southwestern Donetsk region, with the hope of recapturing the settlements that have been lost to the Ukrainian armed forces over the last 48 to 72 hours. These same sources are also claiming that Ukrainian forces have already been pushed out of Makarivka, with a further advance being attempted towards Storozheve. So interesting, that's what the Russians are claiming. The no reports are saying the 88th Separate Marine Infantry Battalion, part of the 35th Marine Brigade, repelled a Russian counterattack just south of recently liberated Storozheve. In total, Russians lost 4 armored vehicles. The T-80BV was destroyed prior to the attack. Also, several POWs were taken. So this is a claim that around this kind of area, the Ukrainians are repelling the attempt at the counterattacks, but they are taking place. We'll have to keep an eye on what's going on there. There is some other footage that I showed you in the news piece this morning that was south of Robertona, that's further to the west, where we have seen a couple of tanks in a small tank column of the Russians getting taken out, and there's various footage of vehicles being lost along this front line. I won't show you everything, but you get the point that actually, I think this is quite interesting that already the Russians, and I guess this is a sign that they can't just keep ceding land, that they need to push back. They are putting on counterattacks, and I think that is fairly significant. I wonder whether the Ukrainians would have planned for that in this very early stage of their attack, because bear in mind that these are still only light attacks. You haven't seen any of the heavy brigades full of some of the best equipment being thrown at here. Yes, there are some Leopard tanks that are being thrown at some of these probing attacks, but it's not the full heavy brigades being called into action. It's not the full counteroffensive, if you like. Anyway, as we come further to the west, so just to summarize, there are gains for the Ukrainians around here, but it could be that the Russians are pushing back. There are gains for the Ukrainians around here by Levadny and Novodarivka as well. We come to the west. We'll go back to Andrew Perpetua, who says, I'll go to his Haliapale area. So Haliapale area, rumors about, oh goodness. Rumors about Ukraine capturing Marfapil. I see no evidence, otherwise no information. So Marfapil is just here. There could be some activity in that area. Droznyanka as well. I think there's been some activity. Haven't heard much though since. And then we come on to south of Orikhiv, where quite a lot of stuff is happening, and the Ukrainians have lost more equipment. Now, this is based on his sort of synopsis of what's taken place over the last couple of days and the loss of the large amounts of equipment. Orikhiv area, Ukraine has gone on several disastrous large-scale attacks with little known success. They've lost a lot of vehicles here. The blast markers and tractor icons are all damaged and destroyed vehicles. So he's a lot more critical of the Ukrainians in that area. So this is just south of Malatokmachka, which is here. So that's where the Ukrainians seem to have lost quite a lot of their equipment that we've heard so much about. A little bit more success further to the west near Kamyanska, near the reservoir on the way to Vasilivka. But of course, what's interesting now is the reservoir really is not a reservoir. It's not full of water, and you could imagine attacks across the reservoir are perhaps more viable now. So I don't know if that's something that the Ukrainians are going to adapt to, whether the Russians will adapt as well. But there seems to be more success for the Ukrainians in the Lobkove area here on the way to Vasilivka. So Andrew Perpetua says of this Vasilivka area, Ukraine has Possible advances here marked a large grey area due to unknown nature of the area, unconfirmed Ukrainian captures along with vehement Russian refutations. But he goes on to say, and this is important, overall, Ukraine is attacking Russian logistics, artillery, and supply roads with their artillery, particularly at night. Ukraine is liberally using artillery. So they've had shell hunger for a long time. And I said for a long time that I'm pretty sure they are stockpiling reserves for this attack. And that appears to be the case there. They are using artillery as you'd expect them to in a full attack, which is use a lot of it, hammer the heck out of the entire Russian lines, um, but also just hit sensible places particularly. Ukraine is liberally using artillery, firing large numbers of rounds, again, particularly at night. They are also primarily attacking at night. So, yeah, that is essentially what's going on along the front line. Fairly similar to yesterday, with just some marginal advances in places. Oh, quite a lot of advances in the Velika Novosilka. I'm just really interested to see whether the Russian counterattack amounts to anything. Bakhmut, there are advances, just no great detail on that, and some heavy fighting taking place, or fairly heavy fighting, in Avdiivka and, as ever, Marinka as well. So uh, there was this potential rumors of some activity in the Luhansk area too. As I keep saying, I wonder what Ukraine are going to do about that area. Will it be a place for a decoy, a feint, a surprise counterattack? All these options are still open. Anyway, that's a frontline update. I'll try and keep you updated throughout the day if anything major happens. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for your support. Really appreciate all of you wonderful people, all the members who are superb, people on Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal. It does allow me to do this. Honestly, without that, I couldn't do what I do. So thank you very much.